My husband was buttoning his shirt while my younger sister stood in my robe, and somehow they both looked at me as if I had broken into their bedroom. The room belonged to a lake house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, that I had chosen, renovated, and paid for. Outside, sleet tapped against the black windows. Inside, the bedside lamp lit the white silk robe on Claire's shoulders and the diamond bracelet around her wrist. I knew that bracelet. 2 weeks earlier, I had found an $86,700 invoice buried in the expense records of NeuroVista, the medical artificial intelligence company my husband and I had built in Chicago. Ethan Mercer did not apologize. He finished the last button and said, "Claire didn't steal anything from you, Rachel. I chose her. With you, all I had was contracts, work, and a cold house." I felt the sentence enter me like broken glass, but I did not scream. I raised my phone and photographed the bracelet. "Put that down," Ethan ordered. "Was the bracelet a romantic decision?" I asked, "or did you bill it as clinical research?" Claire pulled my robe tighter. At 31, she still made the same wounded face she had used as a child whenever consequences arrived. "We never wanted you to find out like this." "How did you want me to find out?" "With an invitation and flowers." "My name is Rachel Bennett." I was 38 that night, and until then I had believed betrayal could damage only the heart. I was wrong. When the man you love is also your business partner, his affair can reach your bank accounts, your patents, your employees, and the name you spent a decade building. My father taught algebra at a public high school in Rockford. My mother worked overnight shifts as a nurse. I went to Northwestern on scholarships and loans, became a corporate attorney, and learned early that promises mattered less than language people were willing to sign. Claire moved from dream to dream. Acting school became event planning became wellness coaching, and each collapse ended with me paying her rent or tuition. I met Ethan at a health technology conference. He had a brilliant diagnostic model and no idea how to protect it. I built the legal structure, negotiated hospital pilots, recruited compliance officers, and kept investors from owning the invention outright. When we married, NeuroVista was worth a little over $9 million. 8 years later, after a national hospital partnership, analysts valued it near $820 million. Magazine profiles called Ethan the visionary. They rarely mentioned the woman who had protected every patent and negotiated every contract. I told myself that private knowledge was enough. Before our wedding, however, I insisted on a prenuptial agreement and a shareholder covenant. Ethan teased me for being incapable of romance without footnotes, then signed every page. When NeuroVista became successful, I helped Claire rent a condo and gave her a job coordinating company events. I defended her when colleagues complained about missed deadlines. I paid for a certification she never completed. She called me her safety net. I never imagined she was studying the knots so she could cut it. Ethan's absences began quietly. Meetings appeared nowhere on his calendar. His SUV carried a sweet perfume I did not wear. A corporate card paid for private dinners, spa weekends, and the bracelet. Those expenses led me to an LLC called CA Horizon. The initials could have meant anything until I learned its sole manager was Claire Bennett. That was why I drove to Wisconsin. I wanted an explanation. Instead, I found them planning my replacement. "Get out of my house," I said. Ethan laughed. "The house belongs to a holding company. So does almost everything. Don't confuse paperwork with power. You cannot throw the founder out of his own life." He believed that sentence would destroy me. It woke me up. I left without arguing. In the car, my hands shook so badly I missed the ignition twice. Before driving away, I checked my phone. The voice recorder had remained active after I took the photograph. Through the closed bedroom door, Ethan's voice was clear. "It doesn't matter. In 3 months, I finish transferring the patents to Horizon. Then I file for divorce. Rachel gets a house and shares in an empty company." Claire laughed. "And I get the genius." I gripped the steering wheel until my fingers hurt. Then I drove through freezing rain to Chicago, walked into my home office at 3:17 a.m., and opened the fireproof safe. The shareholder covenant was exactly where I had left it. I found the section covering fraud, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and transfers to an immediate family member. The final clause was even more precise than I remembered. If a controlling shareholder diverted intellectual property during the marriage and formalized a relationship with the related beneficiary within 18 months of divorce, his voting rights could be suspended while the injured founder sought emergency review. I read the language 3 times. Then I wiped my face and called my former law school roommate, Melissa Carter. "Tell me you are safe," she said. "I am safe. My company isn't." I sent her the recording, the bracelet invoice, and the LLC filing. She listened in silence. "Do not confront them again," she said. "Do not warn them about this clause. Let them believe they have already won." That was the first night of the hardest performance of my life. For 4 months, I pretended to be broken. Ethan asked for a divorce over dinner, using the grave voice he saved for bad quarterly reports. I don't want to keep hurting you, he said. We've grown in different directions. Is there someone else? He lowered his eyes. For exactly long enough to look decent. This isn't about another woman. I cried because I needed him to believe I saw only the end of our marriage, not the theft of our company. Later, locked in the bathroom, I photographed his proposed settlement and sent it to Melissa. On paper, it looked generous: our Lincoln Park house, $3 million, and 5% of Neurovista. But Ethan had already begun moving source code, licensing rights, and hospital contracts into CA Horizon. If I accepted before proving it, my shares would be pieces of an elegant shell. Melissa hired forensic accountant Daniel Cho. We met before sunrise in a 24-hour diner where no one from our world would recognize us. I brought encrypted backups, vendor payments, board minutes, and access logs I was entitled to see as chief legal officer. Daniel told me fraud rarely hid in one dramatic document. It lived in patterns: duplicate invoices, altered approval chains, unexplained consulting fees, and files opened at strange hours. We found all of them. Ethan had authorized $16.8 million in transfers and linked 7 core patents to Horizon licensing proposals. Claire had signed event consulting agreements worth more in 3 months than she had earned in her entire life. A Cayman account appeared in correspondence with an investment broker. Every discovery made me sick, but each one also built the wall they would eventually hit. At work, Ethan enjoyed my supposed collapse. I arrived with swollen eyes, intentionally asked him to repeat facts I already knew, and allowed his attorneys to call me emotionally exhausted. During executive meetings, he interrupted me and explained legal provisions I had written. Once, in front of 12 department heads, he said, "Rachel needs time away from serious decisions." I watched several people look down at the table. One of them, Dr. Elise Foster, the independent board chair, held my gaze for half a second longer than the others. I could not tell whether it was pity or suspicion. Claire made no effort to hide her victory. She posted restaurants, handbags, and the view from a new Gold Coast apartment. Beneath a photograph of champagne, she wrote, "When real love arrives, everything finds its place." She wore my mother's graduation earrings in one picture. I had left them in the lake house when I fled. Our parents learned the truth when a Society magazine announced Ethan and Claire's engagement 2 months after the divorce became final. My mother called me unable to breathe. "Your own sister?" "Yes." My father did not cry. He placed his coffee cup down and said, "She is not welcome in this house." Part of me wanted them to reject her completely. Another part remembered Claire at 7, crawling into my bed during thunderstorms. Grief does not become simple just because anger is justified. Claire asked to meet at a restaurant. She arrived wearing my earrings and an ivory suit that probably cost more than our mother earned in 2 months. "I want us to be adults," she said. "Ethan and I didn't plan to fall in love." "I assume you didn't plan the Cayman account either." Her smile froze. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Enjoy your wedding, Claire." She caught my wrist as I stood. "You always thought you were better because you studied and solved everyone's problems. But he chose me. I won." I looked at her hand, then at her face. "Then don't get distracted when he asks you to sign things." For the first time, uncertainty moved behind her eyes. The wedding took place at a vineyard estate in Napa. I did not attend. Photographs showed Ethan kissing my sister beneath white roses while investors toasted them. Their public story was that love had bloomed after a cold marriage ended. Ethan did not know the wedding date completed the condition in the covenant. I waited 6 more months. Melissa hated the delay, but Daniel needed a clean chain of evidence, and I needed them to feel invincible. People become careless when they believe the injured person is too ashamed to fight. During those months, I rented a modest apartment overlooking the Chicago River. I adopted a shelter dog named Max, a brown mutt with one white paw and a scar across his nose. He slept outside my office while I reviewed thousands of pages. Some nights I hated the sound of Ethan's recorded voice so much I had to walk the river at midnight. Other nights I remembered our first tiny office above a pharmacy and wondered whether the man I loved had ever existed. The emergency board notice arrived on a Thursday. Ethan planned to announce an international restructuring that would dilute my stake and make CA Horizon the owner of Neurovista's primary patents. My name was absent from the invitation. I arrived 15 minutes early in a charcoal suit, my hair pinned back, carrying one leather folder. The receptionist went pale. "Ms. Bennett, Mr. Mercer said this meeting is private. Tell him a founding shareholder does not need an invitation to stop the theft of her company." 14 directors fell silent when I entered. Ethan sat at the head of the table. Claire sat to his right in a white dress, a tablet in front of her, though she held no office at Neurovista. Rachel, Ethan said with a patient smile, this is not the time for emotional matters. Claire tilted her head. You really need to learn to let go. I placed my folder on the table. That is exactly why I came. To let go of the fraud you tied to my company. Ethan stood. Security. The door opened before anyone moved. Melissa entered with a notary, Daniel, and a second forensic auditor. Before you call security, Melissa said, the board should review whether Mr. Mercer's votes remain valid. Claire's smile disappeared. For the first time since I had found her in my robe, I enjoyed the silence. Melissa placed a document packet before every director. Ethan reached for the nearest copy, but Dr. Foster raised one hand. A formal objection to restructuring will be heard before any vote. I stood. My knees were steady. During our marriage, Ethan Mercer began a relationship with my sister while diverting Neurovista assets to a company she controlled. After our divorce, he married that beneficiary. Today he intends to use this restructuring to legalize transfers he already made in secret. Claire gave a nervous laugh. This is the resentment of an ex-wife. No, I said. This is your certificate of organization. The screen displayed CA Horizon, sole manager Claire Bennett, payments received $16.8 million, patents referenced 7, orders authorized through credentials tied to Ethan. The chief financial officer removed his glasses. Those licenses belong to Neurovista. They belong to Neurovista, Ethan said. The transfer is part of a global strategy. A strategy never approved by the board, I replied, with your mistress as beneficiary. Claire turned to him. You said everything was approved. He did not answer. Melissa played the Lake Geneva recording. Ethan's voice filled the room, promising to leave me with shares. In an empty company. Claire's laughter followed, and I get the genius. My sister lowered her face, not from remorse, but because everyone had heard the price she placed on her love. Ethan struck the table. A private recording does not define this company. Then let's discuss signed documents, Melissa said. The notary displayed the original covenant. Ethan's initials appeared on every page beside his attorney certification. The clause was simple: a shareholder who diverted assets during marriage and formalized a relationship with the related beneficiary within 18 months of divorce would lose voting rights pending independent review. That is a trap, Ethan shouted. It is a conflict of interest clause, I said, that you approved when you believed you would never become the conflict. Dr. Foster reviewed the language. Until the review is complete, Mr. Mercer's voting rights are suspended. The restructuring cannot proceed. That was the first reversal. The second came from Claire's chair. She stood with a colorless face and removed a flash drive from her purse. If he falls, I am not falling alone. Ethan spun toward her. What are you doing? I found this after the wedding. You said the files were backups. The drive contained messages between Ethan and another investor. He planned to sell Horizon after obtaining the patents. In one message he wrote, Claire is useful for the romance narrative. Once she signs the assignment, I can remove her with a settlement. Claire slapped him in front of the board. I was a tool too. Do not do this here, he whispered. You did all of it here. I felt neither pity nor joy. My sister had helped destroy me because she believed she was inheriting a crown. Now she understood she had only been another ladder. The third reversal came when Dr. Foster asked the General Counsel to open a sealed ethics report. A junior engineer named Priya Shah had filed it 5 months earlier after noticing proprietary model weights copied to an external server. Ethan had ordered the complaint buried and Priya dismissed for alleged performance problems. The report preserved server hashes that matched Daniel's evidence. Exactly. Ethan stared at Dr. Foster. You knew? I suspected, she said. Rachel gave us proof. 2 directors Ethan considered allies immediately requested his removal from executive duties. The representative of our largest fund froze new investment. Dr. Foster called a recess and ordered all evidence delivered to the Audit Committee and Federal Counsel. Ethan cornered me near the windows while voices rose around us. Rachel, we built this together. You cannot push me out of my own company. That is what I thought when I saw you put my sister in my bed. I made a mistake. A mistake lasts a night. You formed companies, moved patents, falsified a story, fired an employee, and married the beneficiary. I can give back whatever you want. I do not want what you offer when you are afraid. I want what you tried to steal. The investigation lasted 9 months. The board appointed me interim chief executive while the transfers were reviewed. I rehired Priya with back pay and a formal apology. Hospital partners stayed after we created an independent compliance committee. The 7 patents returned to Neurovista. Horizon's accounts were frozen. Ethan faced civil fraud claims, securities scrutiny, and criminal referral for falsified reports. He stopped being the celebrated genius of medical AI. Investors saw him for what he had become, a liability wearing an expensive suit. Claire filed for separation before their first anniversary. One night she texted, "He used me. I am a victim too." I answered, "You became his victim after choosing to become my betrayer. Both things can be true." She asked whether we could meet. I did not respond. Forgiveness, I learned, is not the same as restoring access. My parents mourned her absence like a death without a funeral. My mother packed childhood photographs into a drawer but stopped asking me to reconcile. My father said, "A daughter can make a terrible mistake. She cannot build her happiness on her sister's destruction and call it love." I did not devote my new life to hating them. The board elected me permanent chief executive. We redirected part of NeuroVista's platform toward early diagnostics for rural clinics and created a fund for women in technology who lost jobs or assets through financial abuse. I did not turn the company into a trophy. I turned it into proof that my work had always mattered, even when Ethan tried to erase it. The months between the boardroom and that auditorium were not a clean victory. Victory is rarely clean when the person you defeat knows every place you are tender. Ethan fought the suspension in court, claimed that I had entrapped him, and told reporters that an angry former wife was using corporate law to settle a family dispute. He had always understood the power of a simple story. His story was that he created NeuroVista while I managed paperwork, that our marriage had failed naturally, and that I was punishing him for moving on. For 10 days, headlines repeated versions of his claim. Commentators who had never met me debated whether I was brilliant or bitter. A television host asked why a sophisticated attorney had remained married if the relationship was so cold. The question made Melissa throw a remote control across my office. "They always ask why the betrayed person stayed," she said. "No one asks why the liar kept collecting the benefits." I wanted to answer every accusation. Instead, we released only verified documents, the audit timeline, the suspended transfers, the hidden ownership records, and Priya's complaint. Facts moved more slowly than scandal, but they had weight. Within a week, 3 hospital systems announced that their contracts depended on NeuroVista retaining ownership of its technology. Ethan's effort to portray the patents as freely transferable began to threaten the very value he hoped to steal. At headquarters, fear spread through every floor. Employees worried about layoffs and patients worried that diagnostic services would disappear. I held an all-company meeting in the cafeteria because the auditorium was too formal. I stood without a teleprompter and told 430 people that payroll was secure, hospital operations would continue, and no one would be punished for preserving evidence. "This company is not one man's reputation," I said. "It belongs to the people who built it and the patients who depend on it." A few employees clapped. Then Priya stood. The rest followed. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the terrifying obligation of being believed. Ethan called that night from a number I did not recognize. "You are turning them against me. You fired an engineer for reporting you. I protected the company from panic. You protected yourself from evidence." His breathing changed. I recognized the pause he used before becoming charming. "Rachel, there is still a way for us to fix this privately. Withdraw the fraud claim. I will resign for 2 years and transfer half my remaining shares to you." For a moment, I saw the old Ethan in our first office, eating takeout on the floor because we owned no table. That memory was his most dangerous weapon. He knew I did not love only what he had become. I loved the history we had made before it. "And Priya?" I asked. "We can give her a settlement." "And the hospital contracts you moved?" "We unwind them quietly." "And Claire?" He waited too long. "That marriage is complicated." I understood then that his offer was not remorse. It was another restructuring. "All future communication goes through counsel. You will regret humiliating me. You are confusing exposure with humiliation." I ended the call and blocked the number. Claire's situation deteriorated faster. Horizon paid for her apartment, car, and credit cards, so the freeze left her with bills she could not cover. She called our mother first, then our father. They refused to give her money. Finally, she waited outside my office garage one rainy evening. She looked smaller without the curated clothes and perfect makeup. Her hair was damp, and she clutched a legal envelope against her chest. "I need 10 minutes, she said. "You need an attorney." "I cannot afford the one Ethan hired." "Sell the bracelet." Her face tightened. Federal investigators took it as evidence of corporate spending. The absurd justice of that almost made me laugh, but nothing about her face felt funny. "What do you want from me?" "He says I authorized everything. Some documents have my electronic signature, but I never read them. You told me not to get distracted when I signed. You knew." "I knew he was using your company to hold stolen assets. I did not know which lies you chose to ignore. I thought they were ordinary business papers. You were the sole manager of a company receiving millions of dollars. There were no ordinary papers. Rain rattled against the concrete ramp. Claire looked toward the elevators as if hoping our mother might appear and referee us. "When did you start hating me?" she asked. "I don't hate you. That's worse." "No. Hate would keep me tied to you. I am trying to become free." She opened the envelope. Inside were copies of messages, handwritten notes, and a second storage device. Ethan had instructed her to backdate consulting agreements. He had also kept a private spreadsheet listing investors he intended to pressure after the patent transfer. "Give this to your lawyer," I said. "If I cooperate, will you tell prosecutors I was manipulated?" "Istedid had." She still wanted me to solve the consequences, just as I had solved overdue rent and abandoned programs. "I will tell the truth. I will not make you innocent, and I will not make you guiltier than you are." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm your sister." You remembered that only when it became expensive to forget. She flinched, and I hated that some buried part of me wanted to comfort her. I called Melissa, arranged for Claire to deliver the material through counsel, and left without embracing her. The evidence strengthened the case. It also revealed something none of us expected. Ethan had begun preparing Horizon before the affair. He had selected Claire not only because she was available, admiring, and easy to flatter, but because her relationship to me could trigger sympathy if the story became public. He believed the scandal of sisters fighting over a man would obscure a corporate theft. The romance was real enough to wound us, but it had also been part of his camouflage. That was the revelation that finally killed my longing for the man I remembered. Even our destruction had been budgeted. Melissa worried the discovery would break me. Instead, it clarified everything. Ethan had not left because I lacked warmth. He had created a story in which my competence became coldness, my caution became control, and his deception became liberation. Claire had accepted that story because it turned envy into justice. Neither of them needed me to be cruel. They only needed to describe my strengths as injuries they had survived. The civil hearing began in a federal courtroom overlooking Dearborn Street. Ethan arrived with 4 attorneys and the same dark blue tie he wore for investor presentations. Claire sat behind separate counsel, several feet away. She did not look at him. Daniel spent 2 days explaining transaction chains. Priya described discovering model weights on an unauthorized server. Ethan's lawyer tried to portray her as a disgruntled employee, but her preserved hashes matched the company's backups. Dr. Foster testified that no board committee had approved the transfers. Then I took the stand. Ethan watched me as his attorney asked whether I had drafted the covenant provision myself. "I supervised the drafting with independent counsel for both founders," I said. "You anticipated that your husband might someday have an affair with your sister?" "No. We anticipated that a founder might divert assets to a related party. But you benefited when his personal relationship activated the clause. Neurovista benefited when an unauthorized transfer was stopped. Isn't it true that you were furious?" "Yes." The attorney seemed surprised. "So anger motivated your actions?" "Anger motivated me to look. Evidence determined what I did after I looked." The judge glanced down to hide what might have been a smile. During a recess, Ethan approached our table despite his attorney's warning. "You always have the perfect answer." "No," I said. I finally stopped answering the wrong questions. The court upheld the temporary controls and ordered a full accounting. That decision did not end the case, but it prevented Ethan from selling or encumbering the disputed assets. Several investors withdrew from Horizon. The broker tied to the Cayman account began cooperating. Weeks later, Ethan's lawyers proposed mediation. We met in a neutral office with gray walls and coffee no one drank. He offered to surrender executive authority, return the patents, and pay damages in exchange for confidentiality and protection from further corporate claims. "He wants his reputation," Melissa whispered. I looked at Ethan across the table. "What happens to Priya's claim?" His attorney answered. "It can be settled separately." "What happens to the false compliance reports?" "Those are matters for regulators." "Then you are offering me property that belongs to the company in exchange for hiding what you did to the company." Ethan leaned forward. "What would satisfy you, Rachel?" "Accountability that does not depend on my silence." We left without a deal. The board's independent review ultimately found that Ethan had violated fiduciary duties, hidden related party transactions, retaliated against an employee, and misrepresented asset ownership to investors. He was removed for cause. His shares remained subject to claims, and his board seat disappeared. The company referred evidence to regulators without demanding a particular criminal outcome. I wanted due process, not theater. Claire accepted a cooperation agreement in the civil matter. She surrendered property bought with diverted money and admitted that she signed documents without review. Her statement was painful because it contained both responsibility and excuse. She acknowledged knowing that Ethan was married, knowing the money came from Neurovista, and believing him when he said I did not deserve the company. She also described how he isolated her, controlled the accounts, and threatened to blame her when she questioned him. I could recognize her manipulation without erasing her choices. That distinction became the foundation of my peace. My parents struggled with it more. My mother wanted a single answer: either Claire was evil or Claire was exploited. I told her both sisters had survived a man who used intimacy as leverage, but only one sister had helped him target the other. Love could remain without trust. Compassion could exist without reunion. On my 39th birthday, my mother baked the chocolate cake she had made since I was 6. There were only 4 plates: my parents, Melissa, and me. An empty place seemed to hover at the table even though no chair was set. Dad raised his glass. "To the daughter who kept her name," he said. I corrected him gently. "To everyone who learns their name was theirs all along." At Neurovista, I refused to move into Ethan's corner office. We converted it into a glass-walled ethics and patient safety room where engineers, clinicians, and compliance staff met weekly. I chose a smaller office near the product teams. The first object I placed on my desk was not an award. It was the original pharmacy receipt from the night Ethan and I bought takeout in our first office. I kept it to remember that beginnings can be sincere even when endings reveal corruption. Priya returned cautiously. She told me an apology could not erase the months she spent believing her career was over. I agreed. We restored her position, compensated her, and gave the ethics committee direct access to the board. 6 months later, she led a project that reduced false negatives in early lung disease screening. Her success mattered more to me than any headline about my revenge. The rural clinic program grew from conversations with my mother. She remembered patients who traveled 3 hours for specialist appointments and waited months for answers. We created mobile diagnostic partnerships across Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. Every contract contained data protections stronger than the ones investors preferred. When someone complained that my standards slowed growth, I said I had already seen what speed without accountability could destroy. Max became the unofficial office dog. He wandered between desks, accepted pieces of chicken from engineers, and slept beneath conference tables during late meetings. Employees joked that he had better judgment than the former chief executive. I never corrected them. Ethan attempted one final public attack through a long interview. He said I had weaponized marital pain, manipulated a technical clause, and stolen his legacy. The reporter asked whether he denied transferring the patents. He answered by describing how lonely he had felt in our marriage. The clip spread online because the evasion was obvious. I did not respond. Neurovista released its latest clinical results the same day. For the first time, our work outranked our scandal in search results. Claire sent a handwritten letter instead of another text. She apologized without asking for money. She admitted envying how our parents relied on me and resenting every time I rescued her because it reminded her that she needed rescuing. She wrote that Ethan made her feel chosen, then used that feeling to make theft look like freedom. At the end, she asked no direct question. She wrote, "I hope there is a version of us that can exist someday." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I did not answer for 3 months. When I finally did, I wrote only, "I hope you build a life that does not require someone else to lose theirs." It was not reconciliation. It was not cruelty. It was the boundary I could live with. 1 year later, I presented our rural health program in a packed Chicago auditorium. Dr. Foster sat near the aisle. Priya sat with the engineering team. My parents were in the front row. Melissa stood at the back because she claimed lawyers looked suspicious when applauding too enthusiastically. When I announced that 42 clinics would receive diagnostic support, the audience rose. Afterward, my mother hugged me and said, "Your sister chose wrong. You chose to live." My father squeezed my shoulder. "And you built something better than what they tried to take." I looked across the lobby at physicians, engineers, patients, and young women asking Priya about careers in technology. For years, I had believed Neurovista was proof of my marriage, a monument Ethan and I had built together. Now I understood that no company could validate love. What mattered was whether the work served people after the founder's private mythology collapsed. The auditorium celebration did not erase what happened. Healing did not arrive like a verdict stamped on paper. It came through ordinary mornings when I reached for my phone and realized I no longer feared what I would find. It came when I signed a hospital agreement without hearing Ethan's voice correcting me. It came when I laughed at dinner and noticed the laughter did not feel borrowed from a life that was gone. I began seeing a therapist named Dr. Lena Morales, who refused to let me turn every feeling into a legal argument. At our first appointment, I gave her a precise chronology. She listened for 40 minutes and asked, "Where are you in this story?" "I just told you. You told me what everyone did. You did not tell me what it cost you." The question irritated me because it could not be answered with documents. It cost me sleep, appetite, a sister, a husband, and the ability to enter a bedroom without checking the closet. It cost me the instinct to trust praise. For months, when someone said I had done excellent work, I searched for the favor they wanted in return. Dr. Morales taught me that vigilance had protected me but could not become my permanent home. You can keep the wisdom, she said. You do not have to keep the alarm. I tested that idea in small ways. I let Melissa choose a restaurant without reading reviews. I allowed Priya to lead a presentation without rewriting her slides. I gave my apartment key to the dog walker. Each act looked trivial from outside. To me, it was evidence that caution and control were not the same thing. The most difficult test came when Claire was ordered to testify in a regulatory interview. Her attorney asked whether I would sit in the waiting room. I said no twice before changing my mind. I did not go as her sister or protector. I went because her cooperation could recover money for Neurovista and because no witness should be pressured into changing truthful testimony. She emerged after 5 hours looking exhausted. The hallway was nearly empty. She sat 3 chairs away from me. They asked about the first time Ethan kissed me, she said. I stared at the elevator numbers. I don't need to know. It was at your anniversary party. Pain moved through me, sharp and immediate. Claire. I need you to understand that he told me you were leaving him. He said the party was for investors and you had been separated privately for months. You had dinner at our house the week before. I know. You watched me give him an anniversary gift. I know. Then you did not believe him. You wanted permission. She covered her face. For once, she did not deny it. Yes. That single word hurt more than her excuses, but it was the first honest thing she had given me without bargaining. We sat in silence until her attorney returned. Before leaving, Claire said, I am sorry I made your reality inconvenient to mine. I did not forgive her in that hallway. I did, however, stop needing her to confess in exactly the words I had rehearsed. Ethan never reached that kind of honesty. In deposition, he admitted approving the transfers but insisted he believed them beneficial. He called Claire's ownership temporary. He described the recording as private fantasy. When asked why he had hidden Horizon from the board, he blamed competitive secrecy. His explanations contradicted one another, but shame did not appear to trouble him. Losing power troubled him. Losing access troubled him. The possibility that people might remember Neurovista without placing him at its center troubled him most. Daniel showed me a spreadsheet calculating the value of Ethan's remaining shares after penalties. He will still have more money than most people see in a lifetime, he said. For a moment, that felt unfair. Then I understood that punishment was not the measure of my recovery. Ethan's real loss was not poverty. It was credibility. Every future partner would read the record. Every board would know what his charm had concealed. He could buy another house. He could not purchase the trust he had spent. Our settlement required him to return disputed intellectual property, surrender board rights, repay specified funds, and accept independent findings without a confidentiality clause that silenced employees. Regulatory matters continued separately. I signed only after Priya's claim and employee protections were addressed. When the mediator announced agreement, Ethan looked at me across the table. Are you happy now? I considered the question. No. But I am free to become happy. He shook his head as if my answer were another trick. That was the final proof that he had never understood me. He believed everything was a contest with a winner. Who possessed something the loser wanted? Freedom had no value to him because it could not be displayed. The press called the settlement a stunning fall. Strangers sent messages describing me as ruthless, inspirational, vindictive, courageous, or cold. I stopped reading after the first 100. None of them knew that I cried in the grocery store when I saw Ethan's favorite cereal. None knew I kept my wedding ring in a kitchen drawer for months. Because throwing it away felt theatrical and wearing it was impossible. One Sunday, I took the ring to the lakefront. I expected a grand moment. Instead, I sat on a bench while Max chased gulls and realized throwing metal into Lake Michigan would only create litter. I sold it and donated the proceeds to a legal aid organization for women facing financial abuse. Melissa called that the most Rachel ending imaginable. Practical and vindictive? I asked. Documented and tax deductible. We laughed until people turned to look. My friendship with Melissa had survived years of postponed dinners and late-night calls about contracts. During the crisis, it became something deeper. She was the only person who knew the plan while I performed devastation for Ethan. That secrecy placed weight on her too. After the case settled, I paid every invoice her firm submitted and gave her a framed copy of the covenant page that stopped the restructuring. She read the inscription beneath it, for the woman who reminded me to let them sign their own fall. This belongs in your office, she said. No. My office is for the future. Your office can keep one page of the past. My mother eventually asked if she could see Claire. I told her she did not need my permission. Your relationship with her is yours. My boundary is mine. Mom met Claire in a church parking lot halfway between Rockford and Chicago. She returned with red eyes and said little. Dad was angry at first, then admitted he had been waiting for someone else to make forgiveness safe. I told both of them that family peace could not require pretending. At Thanksgiving, Claire did not come. She sent Mom flowers and sent me nothing. That restraint felt like progress. The following spring, she enrolled in bookkeeping classes and began working for a small nonprofit where she had no access to company accounts. I heard these details from Mom and did not investigate them. Sometimes love is knowing from a distance that someone is trying. Trust is deciding whether they may come closer. I was not ready for the second. Neurovista changed under my leadership in ways that had nothing to do with revenge. Executive bonuses became tied to patient outcomes and compliance, not only valuation. Related party transactions required independent review. Anonymous complaints went directly to the ethics committee. No founder could override a whistleblower investigation alone. Some investors complained that the controls were excessive. Dr. Foster answered them in one board meeting. We nearly lost the company because charisma was treated as governance. We will not make that mistake twice. For years, Ethan had cultivated a culture where urgency excused shortcuts. He loved saying that disruption required breaking rules. I replaced the slogan with a question printed inside our conference rooms: who bears the risk of our speed? Engineers initially mocked it. Then they began using it. The first rural clinic deployment took us to a town in western Illinois. My mother came because she wanted to see the nursing workflow. A farmer named Samuel had ignored chest pain for months because the nearest specialist was 2 hours away. Our system flagged an abnormal pattern and helped the clinic move his appointment forward. The technology did not save him alone, clinicians did. But it gave them time. Samuel's wife hugged my mother in the parking lot. Watching them, I remembered Ethan calling the company his life. He had been wrong in a way larger than ownership. A company built for health should never become a founder's mirror. It existed for people whose names would never appear in magazines. On the drive home, Mom said, "This is what your father and I hoped education would give you. A medical AI company? A way to make your hard work useful to someone you don't know." Her answer stayed with me. I began mentoring young attorneys and founders. Especially women negotiating agreements with romantic partners. I never told them to expect betrayal. I told them clarity was not cynicism. A fair agreement protects love from assumptions, and if someone treats basic accountability as an insult, the insult may be information. At one workshop, a founder asked whether my covenant had saved me. No, I said. Evidence, colleagues, and the courage to act saved the company. The covenant gave us a door. We still had to walk through it. Afterward, a woman waited until the room emptied. She said her husband controlled their shared business accounts and called her paranoid when she requested records. I did not tell her what choice to make. I gave her the number of a financial abuse clinic and advised her to use a safe device. Her hand stopped shaking when she put the card in her pocket. That moment mattered as much as winning the board vote. My apartment gradually became a home. I bought furniture I liked without wondering whether Ethan would call it impractical. I painted one wall deep blue. I filled the balcony with herbs that survived despite my inconsistent attention. Max claimed a linen chair and refused to surrender it. On the first anniversary of the Lake Geneva discovery, I woke before dawn. I expected grief to ambush me. Instead, snow covered the river, and the city looked quiet. I made coffee, sat beside Max, and opened the photograph of Claire's bracelet. For months, that image had been evidence. Now it looked like what it truly was, a small bright object carrying an enormous lie. I moved it from my favorites into the case archive and closed the folder. At work that afternoon, Priya brought me a prototype report. Dr. Foster called about an expansion vote. Melissa texted a joke about corporate romantics and footnotes. Life crowded out the anniversary before I could make a ceremony of it. That was healing too. Several weeks later, Claire called from a new number. She said Dad had been taken to the emergency room with chest pain. For one terrifying hour, every boundary became irrelevant. We met at the hospital, stood on opposite sides of Mom, and waited. Dad's test showed no heart attack, only an arrhythmia that required treatment. When the doctor left, Claire and I were alone near a vending machine. "Thank you for coming," she said. "He's my father." "I know. I meant thank you for not making Mom choose who could be here. This is not the place for our war." She nodded. There was no dramatic embrace. She bought 2 coffees and placed one beside me without asking. I drank it after it went cold. Dad recovered. The hospital night did not restore our sisterhood, but it proved we could occupy the same room without turning pain into a weapon. That was enough for then. Months afterward, Claire mailed me the graduation earrings. No note. I held them in my palm and remembered Mom fastening them on me before the ceremony, Claire complaining that my cap looked ridiculous, Dad taking too many photographs. Ethan and the affair did not own the history of those earrings. I cleaned them and wore them to the rural health presentation. When Mom noticed, tears filled her eyes. She touched one pearl and said nothing. The board presentation that followed was the largest of my career. Investors expected numbers, but I began with Samuel's clinic and Priya's report. I explained that governance, technology, and patient trust were not separate topics. Every shortcut eventually reached a human being. The directors approved the program unanimously. Our largest investor, the same representative who froze funds during the scandal, told me afterward, Ethan made people believe speed was the company. You made them understand trust is the company. I thanked him, though I no longer needed his sentence to know my value. That evening, I returned to my apartment with Max. I kicked off my heels, opened the balcony door, and looked at the lights along the river. I remembered the white robe, the bracelet, Claire's laugh, and Ethan promising I would be left with worthless shares. The next morning, I drove to Lake Geneva for the first time since the night of the discovery. The holding company had transferred the house to Neurovista during the settlement, and the board planned to sell it. I went to remove the few personal things that remained. The bedroom looked smaller in daylight. The white robe was gone. The lamp stood where it had always stood, and an empty hook marked the place where my wedding photograph once hung. I expected the room to accuse me of being foolish. Instead, it looked like lumber, fabric, and paint. People give rooms power by what they survive inside them. In the closet, I found an old cardboard box containing early Neurovista notebooks. Ethan's sketches filled the first pages. My handwriting filled the margins with questions about consent, privacy, licensing, and liability. We had built the company in conversation, each of us adding what the other could not see. Acknowledging that truth no longer threatened me. He had contributed brilliance. He had also chosen corruption. One fact did not cancel the other. I carried the notebooks downstairs and left the remaining furniture for the sale. On the dock, the lake was gray and perfectly still. Max sniffed the boards, then leaned against my leg. Melissa had once asked whether I wished I had prevented the wedding and activated the clause earlier. I had thought about it often. If I had warned Ethan, he would have hidden the transfers better. If I had begged Claire to stop, she would have used my desperation as proof that she had won. Waiting had hurt, but it allowed their choices to become undeniable. Still, I no longer admired suffering merely because it produced a useful result. I would never tell another betrayed woman she had to be strategic every second. I had broken down in showers, parking garages, court bathrooms, and the quiet space after meetings. Courage was not the absence of collapse. It was refusing to let collapse make every decision. I locked the lake house and gave the key to the realtor. As I drove away, I did not watch it disappear in the mirror. They had mistaken my trust for ignorance and my grief for surrender. Months later, a young reporter asked me what revenge had felt like. I told her revenge was the wrong word. Revenge would have made Ethan and Claire the center of everything I built afterward. Accountability stopped them. Purpose moved me beyond them. The distinction mattered because anger could open a door, but it could not choose the whole road. I still missed my sister sometimes. I still grieved the husband I believed I had. Those feelings did not weaken the boundary. They proved that leaving had cost something real. They never understood that a woman can love honestly and still read every page before she signs away her future.